Next, we sit down for a one-on-one interview with Ben Schwam, the Deputy Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Boards. Mr. Schwarm discusses the details of Senate Bill 16, which would alter the state's school funding formula. He also discusses Vision 2020, a policy proposal which offers an alternative to Senate Bill 16, as well as other education reforms. This runs about 30 minutes.
Ben Schwam, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
Sure, thank you.
As we tape this, we're awaiting the return of the Illinois Legislature for the Fall Veto Session. And one of the pieces of legislation that was initially introduced in the spring, but there will be a subject matter only hearing on it coming up on next week on Tuesday as we tape this, but is a bill SB 16, which has to do with the funding formula for schools. It's raised some controversy. It may not be voted on in the veto section, may not come back until the spring actually, but would you lay a foundation for us, give us an overview of what is this bill and what is it trying to do?
Sure. The bill itself started with a resolution a couple of years ago where they wanted to look at the school funding formula. They put a committee together. They did a lot of work. They met throughout a summer, held hearings around the state, and we really appreciate the effort that started with the legislature seriously looking at school funding and what we should do about it. We thought that was long overdue. So we were thankful that they're looking at the issue, number one. Basically, what Senate Bill 16 is trying to do is with the available funds that we have currently for school funding, to get those funds generally to the school districts that need it the most. And generally, our formula is based off local property wealth first, and what this proposal would do would be to shift some of the state funding to those school districts that have lower property values.
And we should point out, first of all, that as the Illinois Association of School Boards, you represent schools across the state. The management of the local schools are your members, and so you don't have a position on this as an organization because you have some districts that would benefit and some districts that would be losing some money were this to go through.
Right, we are neutral on the bill, and really I think that the issue is larger than that. We certainly do not have a problem with the concept of getting funding to school districts that need it the most, which is the basic premise. How you get there may need a little more study, we think. But most importantly, we think that instead of looking at this issue at a time where they seem to be saying we don't have funds for schools, we're being cut and prorated now, we have been for several years, and generally it seems that the idea is you will continue to be cut and prorated, and given those circumstances, we want to change the funding formula. We really think that we need to look at school funding in general and find a funding solution for all school districts. And I think that's the larger picture here.
I want to run through just to drive home the point again, so that most of the funding for schools comes from local property taxes, right?
Correct.
So when you have the collar counties, let's say, where home values are more and maybe they have more industry, you're going to have a lot more taxes being paid that can fund the schools, and so they're wealthier, those schools. They're going to have
Generally,
more
yes.
money. The opposite is true typically downstate. You have farming communities, you have just communities where there's not a lot of high property values. I mean, you have some people, living in homes that might be worth $30,000 instead of $300,000. And so those schools, they would argue, are impoverished. Now, the state, on the other hand, had a foundation level of every student is supposed to get so much money spent on them. I believe that, I don't know, it was like $6,000 some odd dollars.
Correct.
Although in recent years, because of the state of Illinois' financial crisis that they've had, the state has not even been paying the foundation level. They've been paying, something like 89% of
Correct.
What they said they would pay. Is that right?
That's correct. The foundation level in state law right now is $6,119 per pupil. And that is what the state says that a student should have, that amount of money they should have behind each student. That amount does not all come from the state for any district. As you said, it starts with your local property tax wealth. There's a calculation they use. Once they use your property wealth, then it says, okay, you generated X amount from your property wealth, then anything short of that to the $6,119, the state makes up the difference. So the state generally doesn't pay $6,119 per pupil for any district.
So
It's
if
gonna-
a
it's gonna
district,
float.
let's say in DuPage County, where it's a wealthy county, if a district had enough local property taxes that they could spend $10,000 a year per pupil, does the state kick in money for that?
It does not kick in money in the general formula. That again, what we're talking about to this point has been the general funding, school funding formula. Once you are outside of the formula, because of your local wealth, they have something they call the alternative formula, which would give them a little less money per pupil from the state. And they also something that they call the flat grant, which is generally in the description that you had laid out. If you could do that on your own, they're going to say, you're not in the formula at all. We will give you a flat amount of money per pupil. I believe it's $218.
So even the wealthy districts are going to get some money from the state?
They get some. Usually, in that case, it might be 2 or 3% of their total spending.
And on the other hand, then you're going to have areas, let's say, in some small farming community in southern Illinois, and they may only be able to come up with, let's say, $3,000 per pupil. The state then would, ostensibly kick in $3,000 per pupil for them, huh?
Exactly. And I don't know what the highest is, but those that are largely relying on the state, I mean, you might get up to 75 to 80% of your funding coming from the state. So again, that floats.
On the topic of school funding then, and when you have your gatherings of members, so you have some members from the northern counties that are going to have more money and some members from the southern counties that have less money. So there's going to be, hey, don't take our money for your kids. Are there other proposals? This proposal, SB 16 that we're talking about, was brought up by Senator Menard, as I believe, and as you mentioned, he had hearings around the state and came up with this. But within the education community, are there alternative ideas that are being discussed that we should hear about?
There always have been, and there are some out there. And again, with the groups that I work with, the school management groups, they have a new program called Vision 2020 that they are going to be enrolling here pretty soon. And it is not all about funding. It's about general public school improvement. But there is a portion of that does address school funding. And generally, what the direction they're going is, the idea is pretty much the same as Senate Bill 16 as
far as the goal?
As far as the goal of getting money
and
to those
which is
districts.
what? To try to equalize the...
Right.
So that you're not having your whole, ostensibly, future ruined by you lost the birth lottery and got born in the wrong place, right?
Sure. And generally look at it two ways. I mean, there's equity and there's adequacy. And our position statements that our members have given to us as staff to work on legislation in the Capitol, those position statements say that any new funding formula needs to address both equity and adequacy. Senate Bill 16 certainly addresses the equity portion of that. Let's be fair on where the money goes to. But it doesn't address necessarily the adequacy, which is to make sure that there's enough money for every school to have some state money to give every student what they need to learn. And generally what we're trying to do is both. And when you look at that, yes, it probably will mean more funding somehow. Certainly we right now would like to at least get up to even, so we're not being prorated 89%. But at some point we think we have to look at it in a bigger picture and make a commitment and prioritize schools to do that.
You know, on one hand, there's only so much money to go around.
We understand that.
On the other hand, when we say as a state that we're going to have a foundation level, and then we don't pay that, when we pay, and am I right, is it about 89% of the funding?
That's what it's been lately, yes.
Are the districts permanently out of that money, or does someone say on a ledger, we owe you 11% for past
No,
due.
they are out of the money. And they made no bones about this. 15 years ago, they did what they call the delayed payment. And they said, oh, you'll get this back. I don't think they ever did get that back, but that was the goal, to get it back. No, they just said, we don't have the money. You'll be prorated that amount. This amount of money we have, you're going to get 89%. That's how far the money will go. So generally, that's the shape that we're in right now. Your question about are there other plans out there, and what we would like to see, I think, is something that addresses this but has somehow research, study, what does it cost to provide this adequate education? In other words, what does it cost to educate a student? What does it cost in real dollars to educate an English language learner or an at-risk student or a poverty student, which is what they're trying to get to in Senate Bill 16 with their weighting system. Again, one of the concerns we have about that, we don't know exactly how they come up with these weights and if they really mean anything, if they are connected to the actual cost. So what we would like to do is say, what does it cost for this type of education, even if you have more obstacles because of a student's background, and find out what it is, and then let's fund it accordingly. We think that answers that question of equity, because again, those districts who need it most because they might have students or higher populations of students with more needs, it would address that. It would get that money there. But likewise, for everybody else, they're still going to say, hey, for whatever the makeup of your community and your school district is, here's what it's going to cost you, here's what the state will try to provide, and again, it's not going to be 100% state funding. We're not asking for that. There'll still be a property tax component, but we can maybe bring that in line a little bit better.
You mentioned Vision 2020, which there is a confederation, for lack of a better term, of those working within the educational arena. And I think trying to put their thoughts together into looking at where are we, where have we been, what do we need to change to improve the future, right? And the label on that plan, which has been a fairly long time in the making, and I don't know where it stands right now, but it's probably still being cobbled together, I guess. But anyway, that's called Vision 2020. What are some of the ideas, at least as we know them at this point?
Well, again, I can't go into a lot of detail on it. One is on the funding part, is that let's look at actual cost of education, figure that out, and pay for that.
Can I insert on that? And first, as you say, you can't go into a lot of details because it's like the soup's not done yet. It's still
exactly.
And so part of that is you got to negotiate with other partners and kind of say what's the deal. And your group, the Illinois Association of School Boards, is not the only be-all, end-all. You're just one of the contributors, so you can't speak for everybody. We often hear, and there are different websites that will say, here's how much somebody is making in education. And someone will go, do we really need to be paying so-and-so $100,000 or $200,000, whatever, which is a lot more than the average person is making. Is part of Vision 2020, is anyone looking at those issues as far as what's an adequate amount to pay somebody to get talent, or is it just on the expenditure per pupil level?
Well, there is a part of that funding formula that actually go to the part of employees, full-time equivalents, they like to call them, FTEs. But how many teachers do you need in a school? How many administrators do you need to try to, it's addressed. I don't know if it's as specific as salaries, but bottom line on salaries, it's going to be market driven. It's going to be what your community wants to do. Again, your school board is elected. They're volunteer, they're members of the community. They make these decisions generally on say, a superintendent's salary. And it's generally...
Now they do for teachers, right?
They generally do.
They
right.
negotiate a contract with
yes,
the...
they do. Yeah, they do the negotiations also.
What about school superintendents? Who would...
It's a contract between the board and the superintendent.
The local school board?
Right.
Okay.
Yes. So it's addressed, but they're going to work that out, and it's going to be market driven. And if they get out of line, that board has ultimate accountability that they're elected. And if the community thinks they're paying too much money, they won't. But then when they look for the next superintendent, your pool is going to be different on who's applying for that position.
We've talked about how the schools, the legislature is not giving districts as much money as we've already addressed. Is that filtering down to cost cutting in different areas within the districts?
Oh, absolutely. The last 4 years, they're generally, most districts have made some cuts every year, each of the last 4 years. We're generally being funded at fiscal year '09 levels in the state, so as we're in FY15. So yes, I mean, there's been a lot of cuts. There's been, you certainly start with some things that you might think are a little easier to let go of, but generally you always start far away from the classroom as possible. Unfortunately, there's still some very important positions and programs that go. Some, it might be librarians, it might be music teachers, to stay away from core curriculum cuts, but almost every district has had cuts in the last 4 years.
Let's talk on the Vision 2020. While we can't say specifically yet what it would do, what are some of the areas aside from money, because we've talked about the money aspect, are there other goals within that
Sure.
plan that you're trying to address?
There are, and again, the financial funding part of it is one part and a fairly small part of it. They talk a lot about having quality educators, and maybe a little bit about the education programs on what you have to go through to become a teacher, the certification process to become a teacher, reciprocity with other states to bring teachers from other states in here. All those teacher licensure and certification laws have changed in the last few years, and actually they found a few problems that I think there were unintended consequences about filling those positions.
And the idea is to just make the teachers that are hired better qualified overall.
Absolutely. What we know about education is that better teachers mean more achievement in your students, and we know that. And with Senate Bill 7 from a couple of years ago and all the other changes we made for Race to the Top, I think we've come a long way in that area. But that's a lot of what they're looking at is having good people in the schools for the students. And then for the students themselves, let's look at educating the whole child is kind of the way we're framing that. And you read a lot in the paper about schools or public schools, or maybe they say failing public schools, which generally is a notion we reject, that we think public schools, for the most part, are doing a good job in the state of Illinois. But even when you look at that, they're generally basing that on a student taking one test, one day in the year, generally in math and science. And if you have a bad day, you're a failing student and you're in a failing school. And our point is there's much more to a student than that test on that day. And we need to look at not only how we do the assessment, and we're not saying get rid of standardized tests, that will still be there. We understand there's a need for
But
that.
there shouldn't be one big data point one day of the year.
Exactly. And let's look at the whole child. And let's look at these students who may not necessarily be inclined in science and math. And we're not saying don't educate them there, but
Right,
maybe
but
that's not where
some
they're
people
going.
can sing and other people good at math.
Exactly right. And there's the arts, and there's music, and there's all kinds of vocational education that we need to look at all this when we're looking at students and learning and grading school districts.
There's actually, I mean, it's interesting you bring up the vocational education. So that's really something that they're looking at doing.
Absolutely.
Because I will say, as the baby boomer generation is leaving the workforce and will for the next 12 to 16 years, we're going to have as a society an increasingly loss of blue-collar people with experience in blue-collar jobs.
Oh, absolutely.
The trades are talking about that. They're not
sure.
going to have enough carpenters. The average age of a farmer, as an aside, is 57 years old.
Right.
So there's a lot of people who aren't coming in various pipelines to
Sure.
replace the people that are going to be leaving.
Absolutely, and we're the first to say we have to value that. There was a bill a couple years ago to increase the high school graduation requirements, to add a fourth year of math for every student, and we opposed that. And a lot of people looked at us and how can you guys oppose that? And that was one of the reasons. That not every student is inclined in that area, and to force them to take a fourth highest level of math in high school that they're likely not going to do well in and not going to like, possibly may fail, could jeopardize graduating, and at the same time, they have to take that. They're not taking this voc ed class, which they like, which they love, they plan to do a livelihood in.
Right.
Why are you going to do that? It's not helping the student.
To what extent or do you, as, and I don't mean you specifically, but the educational community, sometimes we have problems in any industry where there's too much incestuous thought. They don't deal with the outside world. It's almost like they're, whether it's the medical community or the legal community or the educational community. And so when we as citizens bump into the way things are done in a hospital, you're going,
Sure.
You're kidding me. It doesn't seem commonsensical. When we say that Illinois students are educated well, what are we comparing it to? And what I'm thinking, in this global economy, are we comparing it to Arkansas, to Indiana, or are we comparing it to what kids know in South Korea or China?
Sure. And that's a hard question to ask. It's going to depend on, you know, which measurement you're using, or which, and obviously not everybody in the country or in the world takes the same test. So how do you do that? How do you make that measurement? We tend to not measure against, especially international type measurements, because it's so different. I mean, the pool of students is different. I mean, the beauty of public education in Illinois and the United States is that we educate every child. There are a lot of places that don't do that. They take their cream of the crop, who are going to be on that college track, and that's who they're educating in the public schools, and the rest might be immediately in a voc ed program or whatever to work different kinds of jobs. So it's really a hard comparison to make overall, and even, you know, school to school. Again, the demographics are different, the community is different, their wants and needs are different, their student base is different, and it's not always fair. What we're trying to say is, let's compare the district to themselves. Where are you at right now? Let's find a real measurement. Where are you at right now? How are they doing? And now, let's test you next year. Did you get better? Did you improve? Are your students getting better through time? And we think that's the way we have to look at that.
Ben, when you have your, you had mentioned, well, let me just ask, when you talk to different people to kind of get feedback, and you talk to, let's say, the merchants groups or the Illinois Manufacturers Association, are you asking them, are they getting the quality of product that they need as far as students in Illinois being educated?
We have regular contact with these groups, especially during the legislative session. We meet weekly with them, actually. And we have other types of meetings and different organizations we belong to where we kind of have a cross-section and an overlap. Inevitably, that question does come up. If we don't bring it up, they do. And we have those discussions. We don't always necessarily agree on.
Are they generally telling you they're satisfied, not satisfied?
It really depends. It really depends on where they're at and what they're doing. You know, there's two sides of every story, and you know, to where you hear somebody, you know, a manufacturer of some sort say, well, we're getting people come here, you know, who can't read or write. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. And then the flip side, we get people who say, yeah, they're coming to our group or our school or our community, the business people, and they want people with all this education and all these skills and higher education to pay a minimum wage. I don't know if that's true either, but those are the two, you know, somewhere in the middle lies the truth, and we try to get to it. But I think the point is, we do work with these people, and our members are, again, they're elected, they're volunteer, they have real jobs. They belong to the Farm Bureau, they belong to the State Chamber of Commerce, they are small business owners, and we hear that. Believe me, you know, we hear that from our members, not from the school side of it, but from the business side of it.
You know, I want to remind the viewers of the nature of your organization, that you represent people who are elected to their local schools, boards. And so they might be farmers in a small town in southern Illinois, and they might be corporation executives in Chicago.
That's exactly right.
So you, as an organization, you deal across the board with you know, all kinds of people and all kinds of walks of life and economic conditions, which is, I think, interesting because that's very broad, and you really have your fingers on a lot of what's happening in the pulse of Illinois. I mean, you get that feedback from people. It's also interesting, and I'm just going to remind people on this, it's kind of a fascinating for all the people that get paid big dollars in government, and there's a number of them. The school board members don't get paid.
They do not get paid, no salary, no pension, there's nothing in it. It's certainly community service from their point of view, and there's no financial gain for them at all. Matter of fact, many might say it's a thankless job.
I mean, I think that's something that's encouraging in this democratic process, that you get all kinds of people who often are going to go out and take a job, as you say, no money. They're going to put hours and hours of their own time into it and often get nothing but negative feedback about why did you do this or why did you do that.
Exactly right. Get a lot of questions when you're in the grocery store from what we hear from, from some of those guys.
Before we let you go, because you, among other things, hats you wear here in the organization, you deal with the lawmakers and they have their ideas and you have to say, here's how we think of that idea, and I would guess that sometimes you are pushing an idea that maybe you have something you think would improve education. When you have a change of government, as we are about to have, and it's been 12 years since we had a change of government, I don't recall if you were with the organization.
I was.
What does that do to your job, just out of curiosity? How do you, as an individual representing the organization, does it matter,
Sure.
or how do you approach a new governor coming in?
Well, it certainly matters, and we will try to have a relationship with the governor and his staff and whoever his point person on education might be, and we'll reach out to them and sit down. And I have been doing this for a long time, and I've been through several governors, and we've tried to do that each time, and it's varying success on how much of a relationship you can build. When Governor Edgar was in office, we had a fantastic relationship with him. And our executive director of our school management groups would go over and meet with him every couple months, and they would just sit and talk, and it was very productive, very positive, and they felt very comfortable with each other. Through the years, it hadn't been that way with all the other governors. So, but we'll be reaching for that, and if nothing else, trying to find common ground and see what we can do to move forward. I
will say, and I know you're not going to make a comment, but Governor-elect Rauner, at least one of the 4 points that he made, is he wanted to, I think, put some more money into education and improve education in Illinois. So hopefully that will work out for the benefit of everyone.
I think so. I think there's going to be plenty of common ground. We won't agree on every issue, but I think there'll be enough common ground to move some things forward.
All right, well, Ben Schwam, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.